The Bitcoin story as a whole is one of the most optimistic and inspiring stories out there. That fundamentally shifted something in my brain about how much infinite abundance there can be in this current world. Things can come along and fundamentally shift the world for a more positive way. There's just a kind of certainty this network gives you that just doesn't exist elsewhere in the world. I don't think the market has caught up to how profound this is. The fiat system is wildly unethical, and I want it to end as quickly as possible. Bitcoin is one of the best avenues to do that. I certainly feel much more optimistic around how the world's trending right now because of this, and I wish that for more people. And Bitcoin needs to be that for the world just because of how much hope there is.
All right, Michael Sullivan. How's it going, man? Thanks for being here.
It's good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm pumped.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. I'm a fan of yours. I follow you on Twitter at SullyMichaelVan.
Yep.
And, of course, he's an author, and he's just put out the Bitcoin Fiction of the Year, Blood of the Bourgeoisie. I have it. I'll be honest, I haven't finished it yet, but I have started it, and I'm really enjoying it. So we're going to talk about that for sure a lot on this interview, but I also want to start the interview by just asking you, what is your favorite thing about Bitcoin?
I think I would have had a different answer to that question almost every time you ask me, every 6 months since I've been in Bitcoin. It kind of feels like it changes for me. At this stage currently, it's Bitcoiners and the community around Bitcoin. Like previously, some of the optimism I felt around like finally having financial freedom for the first time in my entire life was a big part of it. But with the book launch and everything and being so much more involved in the community now, it's just been overwhelming to connect with so many people that are like-minded, because like this is a pretty alienating thing to like be obsessed about, spend a lot of your time thinking about. And that, coupled with writing a book about it, was a very long, arduous, and lonely process. So getting to interact more with Bitcoiners post-launch has just been amazing for me, and I'm incredibly grateful for the community.
Yeah, that's awesome. So have you felt like just like the support from the community of Bitcoiners talking about the book and reading it and wanting to pump it up, or meeting people in person and giving you feedback? Like, what have you felt from the community?
All of the above. That is specifically hearing about what people think of this thing that I've worked so like just quietly on for such a long time. But it's also all my long amounts of writing time at night now have become slightly more social, where I'm hopping on spaces, doing calls with people. Literally everybody that's reading the book, if any of you are on listening to this, like, you can just hit me up and text me about the book, and I'll chat with you about it as much as you want, just because it's fun. Like, it was, again, like such a solo thing that now enjoying this and being part of it in a more interactive way has been a blast for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I saw you say before, you said basically part of the reason you wanted to write a book about Bitcoin was you wanted to give something back to Bitcoin, because you've gotten a lot out of Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So I was curious to say, like, if you could expand on what you've gotten out of it, aside from, I'm assuming gains in your purchasing power.
Yeah, the gains come first, and then, well, I suppose they say, like, come for the gains, stay for the financial freedom, or stay for the revolution, or whatever the phrase is. Yeah, definitely the way that it felt for me. Come in. I came in, like, I originally had exposure like many people do in like 2015. Totally ignored it. 2017 again, with some people were just speculating on it that I was coworkers with. Thought it was a scam, totally ignored it. Did that like 2 more times there, and eventually in 2021, I like realized, like, why does this thing stay around? What is it? Finally did the work, got deep into it. And yeah, initially it came for more of the like, why does this exist? But also like, I want to pump my bags kind of reason. But then quickly went deep down the rabbit hole very, very quickly. And yeah, the freedom money aspects really kept me around. But the gains too, like, there's just a kind of certainty that I feel like saving with this network gives you that just doesn't exist elsewhere in the world. And the longer I've been here, the more I feel like I can have like a little more hope financially for my future. We talked a little bit briefly about like children and stuff before hopping on here, and like, I very much attribute the desire to be a parent and the financial comfortability that Bitcoin gave me, like, kind of helped me along that journey to have children maybe a little bit sooner than I would have rather. So a couple thoughts there, but I'm incredibly grateful for this orange coin.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the hope aspect is one of the coolest things about Bitcoin, because I think of, like, outside looking in, people just think like Bitcoiners are crazy, or like they're just money hungry, or like they think of us as crypto pump and dumpers or something, When you're actually into it, you're like, no, this is about turning away from the sort of nihilism that you see just in every other, source of media or social media, right? Everywhere. And yeah, if you're on Bitcoin Twitter, it's pretty toxic in a lot of places. But if you're really, there for the sovereignty and the freedom and the, death to central banks aspect, right? It is fundamentally about hope and, wanting better for yourself and other people for the future?
I think that the network finally like helped me see how powerful free markets could be in everything too. Like right now, one of the things I see the most pessimism around broadly in the world is AI. People worried
Mm,
it's going to cause like mass layoffs, which to some degree it's certainly going to, or just require immediately to have UBI for everybody. Just all these other things and fear of like AGI and whatnot. And like there's some validity to each and every single one of those concerns. But for me, I look at it through a Bitcoiner's lens of just like the amount of problems that people require to have solved from them. Like how much free markets allow just like infinitely creating value for other people. And I don't know that I would hold such an optimistic view towards AI if it weren't for Bitcoin. It's hard to know what the version of yourself would be like without Bitcoin, but I certainly feel much more optimistic around how the world's trending right now because of this. And I wish that for more people, frankly.
I think it's one of the most fascinating topics right now. It's largely informed by reading Jeff Booth's book, The Price of Tomorrow, right? In my mind, which is, yeah, the AI revolution that potentially is coming does mean productivity gains in a lot of ways, right? But we do have this fiat system where the productivity gains are not evenly distributed. They're captured by the top generally, but that's not entirely a function of, a lot of people think it's like that's a function of capitalism or whatever, but when you really dig in, you're like, no, that's a function of fiat money printing and the fact that all prices should go down as productivity increases, but they don't because of the fiat money printer. So therefore, when you have Bitcoin, obviously fixed in supply, all prices do fall in Bitcoin terms. So what you're saying to me is, so I've tried to make a couple videos on this topic, and it's hard to tell how much other people care because it's so in the weeds and niche. But it's like, yes, you do reap the rewards of the productivity gains and the technological innovation of AI if you're saving in Bitcoin.
Yeah, that it's The Price of Tomorrow would never be the very first Bitcoin book I'd recommend to somebody. But if anybody's listening that has not read that, that is a must because that fundamentally shifted something in my brain about how much infinite abundance there can be in this current world and what free markets can bring. And I know it's not always easy to see that, and I know it takes a lot of like work to read and research about these things, but it was a huge mental shift, and it's fantastic, fantastic book.
Once that part sort of clicks for you, the hope part sort of really kicks in, and you're like, everyone's doomerism about AI, and you're like, yeah, but if you save in Bitcoin, you'll be okay. And they're like, no, don't talk to me about that. Like,
yeah, they just
okay.
trying to pump your bags, and
Yeah. It's like,
material.
yeah. Me tweeting about it to, my 800 followers is really going to pump a $2 trillion asset. That's my goal.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah. Well, like you said, Price of Tomorrow, maybe not like the most easy entry point book for people who are first learning about Bitcoin, which is part of the reason why I think it's really cool to have more like Bitcoin fiction, right? Like if I really think like you can actually, there it is again, you can sort of gauge how early we are to a degree in Bitcoin by comparing it to, like, I think in Bitcoin, a lot of people think, oh, everybody has a podcast in Bitcoin. Everybody knows about Bitcoin. And if you're in the bubble, you think it's fully saturated. But if you step outside the bubble and go, well, how many people are talking about sports or movies or, pop culture? How much fiction is made about those topics compared to how much fiction or, consumer grade content is made about Bitcoin? It's just the tiniest drop in the vast ocean of content. I don't know, is that part of what motivated you to want to like write a fiction Bitcoin book as opposed to nonfiction, or what was your thought process there?
Part of it was I just felt like I couldn't not write the thing. I just had in my brain that I needed to provide something back to the Bitcoin community because it gave so much to me. I also written a book previously, had these skills, and like knew I was a good novelist. I'm like, all right, I want to expand on this and create something even better than I've ever made before. Plus, it just didn't exist yet. Like this is a nascent genre. There are very, very few Bitcoin fiction stories out there, and I think the Bitcoin story as a whole is one of the most optimistic and inspiring stories out there. But I don't know that it's always told the best way. Even in my own experience, being around other Bitcoiners that have been trying to orange pill people in my presence very poorly, or myself trying to orange pill people in the presence.
Painful.
Yeah, it genuinely is. Like, but I don't know that. I think there's a certain personality type that's more likely to be taken to Bitcoin, and I'm very nerdy. I love learning about the history of money. I love reading nonfiction books about stuff too. I've actually read like 50-50 nonfiction, fiction, even though I do write fiction. But the person typically that's into Bitcoin is not the same kind of person that I think is ideal at communicating Bitcoin to the next cohort of adopters that have not yet come to this network. Like I've used this analogy often, but I wanted something that I could give to my wife's reading group that has no interest in Bitcoin, that would be a good enough story that they are just captivated by the thing. And even it's not like gonna smash Austrian economics right into their face or push like the ideas that we talked about with Jeff Booth and deflation from page one. It's just going to incrementally give them more exposure and see in a pragmatic way where characters are using the thing in the story to make stuff happen, how powerful this could be. So that was kind of the sort of overall ethos behind it. And yeah, so far so good. Like I've had fantastic feedback both from Bitcoiners, and I just got a review recently that so a Bitcoiner bought my book, left it on the kitchen counter of his house. Wife picked it up, started paging through it, enjoyed it so much she read through the entire thing, and it was like, oh yeah, I learned so much about Bitcoin during this. And like that was, I set out to do that, but it's been a really cool thing now that I've actually kind of accomplished the goal, at least in some small way.
I mean, I think that's super cool. Like I would have, maybe it was 15, 20 years ago now at this point, can't remember, but I definitely had my like Dan Brown moment, you know, with the, what's the book called?
The Da Vinci Code. I was going to bring this up.
Da Vinci Code. Yeah, exactly. Which like, yeah, I think, you know, I'm not saying that's exactly what your book is or whatever, but I think Bitcoin as a tool is such an interesting plot device, right? Which I'm sure, you know, you were, you know, interested to figure out how to put it in as a plot device because it's such a unique technology that so many people don't know about, and it can be used in all these interesting ways, and it can be mysterious. And I think that that's super cool. Like we don't have that yet, to my knowledge, in Bitcoin. We don't have that yet, like our Da Vinci Code moment.
So I am so pumped you brought that up. So this is, I've not talked about this publicly ever, but I was just like talking to my wife about it because she's my main editor. So I had this like deeply impactful experience when I was in like 6th or 7th grade. I can't remember exactly when the Da Vinci Code came out, but literally that book. I remember sitting in my classroom and there was like a para and another person around who had just like never really had deep conversations about anything. They just kind of like went about their job, whatever. They'd have like little casual conversations. But the Da Vinci Code had just come out and they were talking about it. And they like immediately launched into a deep ethical conversation about like religion and some of the themes in the book. And it was the first time I'd ever seen that happen where somebody read a story. It was so good that it inspired them to like have deep conversations about the world. And like from that moment, it was I realized like how impactful books could be. Like the vast majority of books go unread. There's like this massive long tail of just books that no one's going to read or care about. But every once in a while, they came along where they can genuinely change public perception in some way. And Da Vinci Code did that, and it's long been one of my favorite books. I really enjoy Dan Brown. I've read a bunch of his stuff. Definitely a big inspiration for me too. But I want that to exist for Bitcoin, and it does not exist yet, and I think it does now. I'm very biased because I wrote the book, and it's like to my own personal preferences and whatnot, but that was genuinely the goal and part of the reason I wanted this to exist. I know people have strong opinions often on Dan Brown. A lot of like fiction people are like don't like his characters, and there's all other things. But for me, like, just the fact that it created that idea and made somebody so passionate about a topic and interested and opened their mind up to these new things was so cool. And Bitcoin needs to be that for the world just because of how much hope it can bring.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, any book that gets that famous as Da Vinci Code is, it's going to be there's going to be people who come back and there's a backlash and people who criticize it or whatever. So that's to be expected. But yeah, that thing was massive, and I think just like you said, it's almost like Trojan horsed an interest in history and religion and these topics that people may not. I mean, so Trojan horsing Bitcoin into something that's actually interesting, or you know, orange pilling through the back door, through the roundabout way, I think is a fascinating thing because, like you said, as Bitcoiners, we tend to be terrible at orange pilling, especially people who aren't actually even interested in being orange pilled. So it literally starts with like, do you have any interest in learning about this thing? And the person's like, no. And you're like, but there's 21 million and you're an idiot if you don't, you know, like that's what we tend to do. And we want to get so excited about telling them about scarcity and why inflation is bad. And they're like, dude, I don't care at all. But yeah, I think that's a really cool idea that like orange pilling through the roundabout, the sly roundabout way, or through the Trojan horse method.
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of room there. And for whatever reason, I think people always want to just go, especially somebody who understands Bitcoin, they want to kind of show off their knowledge. This is really common in teaching. I've been a teacher in a couple other domains, and like one of the big takeaways I had was that if you are like okay at something, you're just starting to get better, you really want to show off your knowledge and spew stuff out at the person. And like that just does not work very well, like typically. So usually information overload, a lot of times the whole there's 21 million of these things, or this is how nodes work, just is not the best starting point with people. They need to see the problem first. And it's more important to like, show how the problem exists in the world, inspire some interest at all, rather than go into the weeds with something. And that strategy for teaching is typically better. There's even like entire paradigms of teaching and schooling that are kind of founded on this. Like my wife was a Montessori school teacher for a while, and similar ideas there where you kind of let people follow their more innate interests. And it's more interest based than it is like, here's all the intense information you have to learn. So at least
Yeah.
trying to have that kind of those elements in the book to some degree.
I've never thought about this thought before, so who knows if it's wrong. But the idea of fiction is almost more show than tell by definition. So you're like, I'm just going to show you a story that's happening and a Bitcoin thing is happening in it. I'm not going to do, I mean, obviously you have to do some narrative exposition to explain, the technicalities as things go on, but starts with like, just show, and then here's a shiny little thing that's interesting. So just show them, and then they go, wait, what? 12 words, and what the hell is going on? I don't get it. But there's an interest that like, that the hope is that it's just interesting because of the mechanisms of it. Actually, what I wanted to ask you is, you've studied Bitcoin for a long time, but writing the book, was there some stuff you learned about Bitcoin that you didn't already know?
The biggest thing that I had to research a lot was like multi-sig and how that all worked. Minor spoilers, not really though, but like towards the end of the book, like how multi-sig works and the fact that you can distribute custody across people becomes completely central to the plot. I'll leave it there. Don't want to spoil anything else, but like that mechanic is extremely important. There's also some like batching transactions and stuff and how frequently you can send transactions that I had to get deep into and just make sure that all my math and stuff was good. The math is not really covered in the book. There's like 2 sentences where it goes over it, and it's not going to like slow down somebody who doesn't have Bitcoin exposure. But I wanted to be as accurate as possible. So like, there's a couple things like that that I did a lot of research into just to make sure we're as tight as possible from a like conceptual and engineering style basis. But that was probably one of the bigger ones.
Well, the worst thing you could possibly do is get it wrong, right? In a book for Bitcoiners, and then just tell a bunch of Bitcoiners to read it, and then they're going to be like, "You got this wrong," like, going to crush you. So I'm sure you were dotting your I's and crossing your T's a lot on anything that involved the technicals.
Yeah, so many beta readers. Like that's one of the reasons I'm like so confident that's really good. Is I had a bunch of Bitcoiners read it, go through all the technical stuff. I had a bunch of people that had no Bitcoin exposure read it. Just a ton of different variety and perspective to try to make sure that it read as well to as many people as possible and didn't have those wild mistakes or egregious errors and stuff. And so far, so good.
This is going to sound self promotional, even though I don't mean it to be. But I was involved in the making of a podcast a year or two ago, where it's not about Bitcoin, but there was a component where the main writer of the podcast wanted to use like crypto as a tool in like how the bad guy does XYZ, right? And so he had written a bunch of stuff, and then I proofread it, and I was like, hold on, buddy, like let me take you for a walk here. Like, this is not how it works. This is not how it works. This is not. And so I had to kind of like be very, very meticulous about correcting it and making sure, trying really hard to make sure like you got the details right. Because I was like, well, this is the quickest way to like, most people won't notice, I guess, because most people don't know, but like kill any credibility with anybody who's interested in Bitcoin if you just immediately get things wrong, right? If it's like, things about private keys or seed phrases, and if you mix those things up and get it wrong, immediately everything tied to that plot point completely falls apart if you get it wrong.
Yeah, there's a relatively popular book that came out that had a little bit of Bitcoin and stuff in it a little while ago. I don't want to call it out, but it did a couple things very poorly that I think like I was very excited about this book, read through it, and I'm like, I just can't do this anymore at a certain point because of some of this stuff. I think that's pretty standard. Like if you come across something that you are deeply knowledgeable about and it's done poorly, like I'm out, not interested.
It's sort of like Steak and Shake saying, should we pivot to accept ETH payments? And then you're like, we will turn on you so fast. Your head will spin. Yeah.
Yep. Immediate outrage by everybody. You have like this insanely passionate user base that you've tapped into, and they will go immediately upon stuff like that.
Yeah. You're going to be like, I wrote a Bitcoin book, but I got private keys wrong. And they're like, no. They'll be burning it outside of their lawns.
Yep.
Now, I don't know if you like wrote the book like with the idea of orange pilling, no coiners or whatever. That may have been like somewhere on the spectrum of goals, from a bigger goal to a smaller goal. But one thing I'm interested in is like marketing it as a Bitcoin book could be a pro in the Bitcoin community, could be a con in the non-Bitcoin community, and the non-Bitcoin community is a lot larger than the Bitcoin community. So like, I'm pretty sure you self-published, and so there maybe there wasn't like a publisher conversation where they were like, no, we have to market it as a non-Bitcoin book. But what were your thoughts around that? About like, could this hurt me if I make it too closely tied to Bitcoin? Like if I put Bitcoin in the title or something.
Yeah, this was something I gave a lot of thought to. I wanted to make sure it was framed and packaged in a way that you could give it to somebody not down the Bitcoin rabbit hole yet, and they enjoyment out of it, because that was one of the large goals of it. But I did not want to turn somebody off. There's so many books out there that have like a giant Bitcoin bee on the cover. They look like a coin, like legitimately hundreds of them, and I did not want to fall into that giant cohort of books out there that already exist. I probably could have got publishers and whatnot. Like I'm a very entrepreneurial person. I wanted to like have complete and total control over this myself. I wanted to manage the entirety of the beta reading process and all these things. And Bitcoin is a pretty divisive thing generally. So I just did not want to go down the traditional publishing thing where they're going to likely prod and poke your story, or massage it in ways to be a more broad audience or tweak the meaning. Because there is some Bitcoin ethos in here that was just non-negotiable for me. Like I'm not going to change some bits about this book because it is aligned with like what I believe Bitcoin can bring for the world. And I could have easily seen a couple things from it get edited out by traditional publishing, not to mention some of the violent things that happened to some of the wealthy people in the early pages. Like I just did not want those things to get watered down. So that was a big part of that too. It very well could be that this is a smaller audience with Bitcoiners, but also like I'm a Bitcoiner. These are my friends that I'm hanging out with and stuff like this. That part was not a question for me. I did not even have it cross my mind that I wouldn't just go talk to Bitcoiners about it. Because, like, yeah, I did write this to Orange Pill people. Like, that was part of it. And I didn't realize that from day one. Like, from day one, I knew I wanted to write a book about Bitcoin. I wanted to write it to my own personal standards for what I wished existed in the world. And, like, what I just felt could be done better. It's kind of a nice side effect that it also, I think, is a good orange pilling tool. But it's both those things. It also is just a book that I wanted to read myself selfishly.
That makes sense. You don't want to be like, well, hey, sorry, our the guy who owns the publishing company that owns this company that owns this company that owns this company is a billionaire, so you can't have billionaires being skewered on page 2. Like,
Yeah.
you'd be like, all right, I'm out of here. I'm doing what I want. Well, you mentioned Bitcoin ethos, like without giving spoilers of like what you wanted Bitcoin ethos to show up in the book. What are your thoughts on, like, as you thought through what's the Bitcoin ethos to you that you wanted to show up in a book, or just that you think the Bitcoin ethos in general, the things that about it that are important?
So I feel like the Bitcoin community is just so wide and encompassing now. There are different cohorts and groups inside of it that have different belief systems and whatnot. So one of the things I wanted to do was have a character that was much more optimistic about Bitcoin, that felt like Bitcoin could be a force for good in the world, that didn't think you needed violence to spread this message, that thought just the inherent incentives in Bitcoin would bring more like abundance and optimism for the world. And then I wanted a character who also believed in Bitcoin, but saw it as a tool to steal from rich people and give to the poor people. Like both characters are using Bitcoin, believe in Bitcoin, but are using it for different things. And I don't really think there's like a bunch of people in the Bitcoin community that want to steal from rich people using Bitcoin and distribute their wealth to poor people. But there isn't a dynamic that exists, I think, and I wanted to like explore both sides of that, kind of hear the perspectives of one side, hear the perspectives of the other side, and kind of see where there might be weaknesses in one argument versus the other. You kind of asked me earlier, and I meant to get back to it, but like one of the really unique things about fiction that just does not exist in any other format, including like even movies or TV, is it gives you the opportunity to ride around inside of a person's thoughts. Like especially in a format like this where I literally have like italicized thoughts for each character, you actually experience their thinking with them. And that's such a unique thing because very frequently when you're learning something, like you talk through a concept with somebody, and by talking through or explaining something to somebody else, it helps you deepen your own understanding, right? Like that's one of the principles of learning is teaching to others so you understand it more deeply. Fiction actually works on the similar mechanic where you are riding around in the thought of somebody else and can understand that thought in a deeper way because it's literally passing through your brain. It's kind of a trippy thing. It's weird. There's nothing else out there like it, but that's why I do think it's such a unique medium to convey concepts. Like when you're reading nonfiction, you are also riding around in the thought of somebody else, but you're not thinking about like them going through the world as a human. You're just kind of like, okay, that's a good idea. With fiction, it's like a more visceral kind of thing that you're experiencing, and I just think that's an underutilized tool.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think the is a test of how much you understand something. Can you explain it to someone else? That goes back to what we said about orange pilling, where I think like a lot of Bitcoiners understand it and think they understand it, but would fail the test of can you explain it to someone else? Maybe I'm just talking about myself because I've tried to go through that exercise of how would I explain it to someone else, and you realize, oh, the first like 90 ideas you come up with of how to explain it are terrible and they're going to make no sense, and so you have to like hone it into what's a much more accessible message for it. The other thing that I think is interesting, you said, so you have the character who wants Robin Hood style character who wants to steal from the rich and give to the poor, and using Bitcoin as a plot mechanism to do that. But I think that distinction is interesting. I agree that I don't think Bitcoiners won't think it's right to steal from someone else, but I do think that part of the ethos of Bitcoin is the idea that it can help quote unquote solve or fix or to some degree improve the wealth inequality problem. And most people think that that's silly because they're like, well, some small percentage of people own most of the Bitcoin. And to me, the argument is like, it's not about that. It's about the fiat system that enriches the top small percent by printing more money, and the way that devalues the purchasing power of the savings and earnings of everybody who's not in the top 1%, and makes asset prices of the 1% go and everything they own go up in fiat value. Bitcoin has the ability to, but hopefully, potentially, fight that dynamic because everybody can benefit from increased purchasing power owning Bitcoin.
I agree with that so strongly. Like that's why these characters have this dynamic between them, because they both want the same outcome for the world. Like both of them see this thing. One of the characters grew up in like Croatia area where they also went through similar collapse. One of them was from Sudan. Like, and both had very different experiences, and both resent the world in some way and see the inherent unfairness in it, but have radically different views. And I think that's just an interesting thing to explore. Like, so I deeply think it's unethical to be stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. But I also think that the fiat system that perpetuates the gap increasing is wildly unethical, and I'm pretty radicalized in the sense that I want it to end as quickly as possible, and think that Bitcoin is one of the best avenues to do that. Like, I don't think that it's going to fix the issue tomorrow by making Jeff Bezos suddenly not wealthy, but he also created a humongous amount of value for the people in the world, and I think that's a massive good. But what is not okay is the fact that when we print more money, it disproportionately increases the purchasing power of those people who hold the assets, and disproportionately steals from those who have an income only. Like that mechanic is just so terrible and toxic across every different dynamic in the market. I want to see that ended. Yeah, you probably know that this is very much a Bitcoiner belief system, but
Yeah, why I think we see it in anger against capitalism. I made a video about this too a little while ago, as like the idea is you're not angry at capitalism. You're angry at fiat. You just don't know it yet. Like that's my stance. Like everybody who's my age, younger, who doesn't, maybe age doesn't even matter. A lot of people angry at capitalism because of the inequality that it's helped to produce. But I have argued that that is much more a function of the fiat system than it is just capitalism itself. And but the also sort of more insidious thing is then leading to the wrong solution. So if you get the problem wrong, you lead to the wrong solution, which is socialism or some other type of economic system that's going to solve this problem. When you don't break the fiat money printer, socialism's not going to do you any better than capitalism you think is doing you, because it's fiat that is the problem.
yeah, a lot of people resent capitalism falsely and want to tear down that system. I just think that is the absolute inverted wrong takeaway from this. There was back in my days of poor orange pilling, there was a heuristic I was trying to give to people to try to like convey Jeff's Booth point, basically, of like, what's the point of capitalism? And they'll frequently say to make things cheaper, to like be profitable and whatnot. I'm like, okay, well then why aren't things getting cheaper? Like just I'm trying to distill this down in a couple questions to illustrate like why is this broken? I would go so far to use the heuristic that if you're not seeing prices going down, you don't live in a capitalistic system. That is about as concise as I can try to like put the problem, where I don't think we do live in a pure capitalistic system because the money printer is so heavily utilized and distorts the free market signals that would otherwise exist. Dampening volatility sometimes might be a good thing, but then you're causing like misalignment in giant subsections of the economy to produce things that people might not even need. And it's just like this inherent like belief that you know what's better for other people is predicated like all like fiat systems are predicated on like thinking you know what's better for people essentially, rather than letting people make their
Essentially,
own.
what central banking is, right? Like, sorry to interrupt you, but that's basically the principle behind central banking. I would argue maybe one of the key ones.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously I agree that the idea of people being, I'm angry at capitalism because that's what's creating the inequality that's making it so it's, my cost of living is a challenge. Not only is being angry at capitalism the wrong thing, we don't actually have capitalism because we don't actually have a free market. So that's where, and once you understand that, you're like, oh, we don't even live in a free market. What's the number one thing that rigs the market to make it not free? Well, it's the money printer and a small group of people being able to control it.
Yeah, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like fundamentally changes you basically. Which is
Yeah.
why I think we're all kind of here and need to connect a little bit because we feel kind of crazy for having come to that realization. That seems like it's just right in front of you, but people don't see for whatever reason.
Well, in that you have a sort of a plot and a character where the idea of like humanizing that experience of currency devaluation, because I also have one of the, I mean, I'm not saying this is my original thought, but I have this belief that to a large degree in the US or in the West or in North America, we talk a lot about Bitcoin versus the dollar, 2% inflation target, et cetera, forgetting that the vast majority of the world does not live in the United States, does not have easy access to the dollar or the S&P 500, does not have a central bank that has a 2% inflation target, which they never actually hit, by the way. But, I'm trying to, it's hard to find actual numbers, but I'm trying to do a video on like what percentage of the world, depending how you define stable currency, you could argue 75 to 80% of the world lives under non-stable currency regimes. That's where it's like, oh, this Bitcoin thing isn't just about like, oh, I got to beat 2% inflation. It's like, no, like you have a character who's like trying to actively escape a much more extreme version of what currency devaluation can do that we're not used to in the West.
Yeah, this was maybe the thing I did the most research on for the book, just because I haven't lived through this personally. I'm from the United States. But it was one of the most moving things to me hearing about some of these situations. Alex Gladstein's work I followed really closely, read his stuff, and just been a huge fan of, frankly. Yeah, Magat Wade, I believe, or Wade, I can't remember how to pronounce her last name. But she's somebody who's from Africa, is a huge proponent of free markets in Africa. I followed her really closely. And then Roya Mabub, too, who used Bitcoin as a tool to help women in, I'm blanking on the country right now. I want to say Afghanistan. I'm not 100% positive on that, though, but there's a bunch of these stories out there. And I think it is useful, especially that fiction being a better way to communicate in an empathetic kind of way, a more emotional way, using those kind of stories is more powerful than just like hearing about somebody who believes strongly in that's from America. No matter how much I communicate that message, I just have not come from those experiences directly, so I can't articulate it with quite as much poignancy as somebody who has. So I tried to use people that had and embed little parts of them into these characters to make sure that that was communicated better than I personally could.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm hesitant, like same way I think you're kind of saying, I'm hesitant to do this sort of Western like white savior thing of like, oh, people in Africa should use Bitcoin to escape currency devaluation. Because like, what the do I know about it,
Yes.
right? Because not having lived through it. But in theory, it should be a tool for being able to do that if people have access to it and education about it. The amount of stories I see about it seems small to this degree, like, but it does feel like something that you would think would become more valuable and useful in parts of the world where they don't have stable currencies? I mean, did you do like a bunch of research?
Oh, it's all out there. Like there's some of them. I don't know. They don't get quite as much traction as like
Yeah.
MicroStrategy bought 10,000 Bitcoin and that's
Yeah.
happening. But the stories are out there. You got to search for them a little bit more, especially during early stages of the Ukraine war, people escaping over the border and that kind of thing. And again, like Human Rights Foundation, some of those things, um, they're not like those massive headline stories, but people are using this thing in that manner. Some other ones that were really inspiring to me were like women using Bitcoin to escape from abusive relationships. Because like when I think abusive relationships, I would think like man beating wife, but sometimes just abusive relationship can be intense, kind of controlling over every aspect of a woman's life, where they have no money, so they feel like they're stuck with this person. So there's a lot of stories out there of women essentially like using and accruing Bitcoin, so they have something that's like outside of the traditional banking system that the husband has any control to, that can get out of there. I never actually used this in the book, but that was just some. There's just a lot of these inspiring stories out there if you look around for them, and it's
Yeah.
those are some of the elements that don't get quite the numbers and traction, but are some of the coolest things about the technology.
Yeah, I totally agree because I think we talk about those things in theory, like, oh, you can put 12 words in your head and cross any border and escape any, crisis or whatever, which you can't do with a house, you can't do with a cow, you can't do with a bunch of gold bars, like you can't do it with anything else. And so maybe I'm too like in the weeds on this weird dynamic between people who kind of like FUD Bitcoin and hate Bitcoin versus Bitcoiners where we're like, but this is just a tool that can help people in the world. Why are you so mad at it? Like just because it's kind of volatile, or like because people run affinity scams that they try to attach to Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is just this tool. There's a book called Resistance Money. And basically the thesis they wrote the book around was like this idea of if you woke up tomorrow in any body in the entire world and you didn't know who you'd be or where you'd live or what regime you'd be living under, would you want Bitcoin to exist in the world or not to exist in the world? And I just think there's a lot of people out there who think Bitcoin is bad and hate it and FUD it, who would say, oh, I want it to not exist. That totally disregards all the things we're talking about, the currency devaluation situation, the how to escape a situation. It's just a tool to help people.
That's one of those books that I feel like should have gotten so much more attention. That single like framing or like a little exercise to go through is just so powerful. It shows that like of course there are people out there that would net benefit from this existing. Like just put your own self out of it. Like imagine yourself getting put. You're going to go randomly into the life of somebody else in the world. Would it be better or worse with this tool existing or not? Like, it's such a great framing. I think those guys are brilliant.
To a degree, I'm not trying to like, mind read you, but like you're coming up with characters for the book and scenarios that they could be in. To a degree, you're Rolodexing through these different situations. Where can I put characters in? And like, am I right about that? Like what situation could they be in, and how Bitcoin could be used as a tool for these different characters in different parts of the world in different situations?
Yeah, and that is kind of how it started. And there's some elements of Bitcoin that I wanted to make sure were in the story, and then you go from there, kind of like first principles style reasoning of like not to use like a very overused term of first principles, but that's kind of how it felt. Where like if I want to show these dynamics of Bitcoin, how can I best do it? What story would be the most precise way to demonstrate this? So the beginnings with Nala escaping from her country were one of them. I picked Sudan as her location after researching a bunch of different countries that had hyperinflation because of some timing reasons with Bitcoin, some proximity to Egypt because that would let me show how they've also had some currency debasement issues and stuff. Not to mention like Omar al-Bashir in particular and his like kind of government handouts and things that he got that helped make his regime more powerful. A bunch of reasons. So basically, I did start from like, how can I best articulate these elements of Bitcoin, and then work backwards about what should happen to the characters, and find people or analogous stories that existed out in the world, and kind of have those be my building blocks. There's a couple ones later too that I'd really like to talk about, but weary I might give too many spoilers. But there's some very much like the story ends in a way that demonstrates a deep inherent property in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, those two I think are kind of the sly roundabout way of orange pilling, because it's introducing use cases for Bitcoin that people in the West, like I said, probably don't think about. The sort of check your financial privilege kind of idea about Bitcoin. I think that's Gladstein's book or his article that he wrote, right? Where like we just think about Bitcoin. Should I buy Bitcoin or should I buy gold? Should I buy Bitcoin or should I buy the S&P? Like we tend to focus in the West, like a large amount of our conversations on it about that. We're like, but it's percent. It's, your percent of gains is going to be more if you buy Bitcoin than if you buy something else. And it's like, well, it actually has all these other interesting uses that people probably have never even think of that are just really frigging cool that this thing exists in the world. It was invented, in the time we are alive.
It's a trip. This thing, like, it does remind you, like we talked about hope earlier, it reminds you of how things can come along and fundamentally shift the world for a more positive way. The hope that you feel from your money being saved and you feeling like you finally have financial security is one thing that I think is so good about it. But also the fact that good stuff can just happen. Humans can create beautiful things that can benefit people across the entire world. Like a single random person can do that. I just think is a great lesson to take away from this whole thing too. Even if you don't believe in Bitcoin or whatever, people can just make stuff and it can make the world better.
One of the tiniest, this is going to sound self-promotional too, I don't mean it to, but one of the tiniest things that sometimes I think people don't even realize is I make YouTube videos. Mm-hmm. I can stick a QR code on the screen. Mm-hmm. Anyone in the entire world can just zap me sats, send me money, value, if they watch that YouTube video. Name another thing in the world that can do that. Well, somebody was like, well, Venmo or PayPal. I'm like, does everyone in the entire world have access to PayPal? And also, by the way, PayPal could stop the transaction. It's just, there's nothing else that exists that simple and elegant. It's just some guy could be making a YouTube video that I liked and he lives in Africa or, who knows? And I could just zap him sats and be like, thanks, I thought that was cool.
And to continue on that thought, nothing else exists that you can take this digital form of value and then you can embed it into a physical item, like by carving it into a seed plate or whatever, or writing it on something, or there's other various tools that can do that too. You can choose whether or not you want this savings to be digital, literally memorized, or a physical item that you can give to somebody. That's just such a cool idea that you can imbue a digital value into a physical item and give it to somebody. It's crazy too.
Again, the idea that many people immediately snap judgment, think that that's a bad thing. Well, it's not tangible, so it can't have any value. Wouldn't something be more valuable if you could transmute it from digital and back to tangible and back? Seems like a no-brainer to me. If you could literally just take the gold bar, dematerialize it, send it halfway across the world in the blink of an eye with almost no fee at all, and have it reappear on the other side of the world. Seems like a useful technology.
Yeah, profound technology. I think Satoshi's older writings about gold too, where he basically took it and said all right, well, imagine gold, but imagine it's just a gray, lifeless metal that you could snap your fingers and transport. And I think that's a really good way to explain it too, of kind of showing that, yeah, there's this industrial value, or the fact that we think it's pretty is not really useful, or it's actually a detractor of gold, not a positive.
Oh, I mean, that's one hell of a rabbit hole to try to go down for yourself, or especially to try to explain to somebody else. The idea that most people think gold has value because it's used in industrial processes or because it's used for jewelry. And then you try to explain to someone, actually, it's better for money to be 100% monetary premium and have no other use, because the two things competing against each other is actually a bad thing. You're actually making everything people want to use gold for more expensive. So it's actually better that this Bitcoin thing has no quote unquote utility. I would call it practical value in the world aside from being money.
Yeah, that's an idea that I could not believe or agree with you more strongly on. And it's also the one that I've got the single most you're crazy looks
right.
when articulated to people. That one is not the one to first go to when you're orange pilling somebody, that's for sure. They do not like that. Even I can't remember the exact numbers, but I want to say 90% of the value of gold is monetary premium versus actual industrial use.
Yeah.
That should be eye-opening, but yeah, I still have struggled to use that as a way to convey this to people.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hate giving Peter Schiff attention, but he is very, very good at rage baiting and engagement farming Bitcoiners. And one of the things, him or any other gold bug will say, it was well, what gives gold its value? Well, it's used in industrial processes, and it's used in manufacturing, and it's used as jewelry. And you're like, Do you realize if it were only used for that, its value would collapse by 90% tomorrow? That doesn't make it a good store of value in the future. It's good at storing its value for other reasons than that. If people all of a sudden were like, well, we're only going to use it for manufacturing and not as money, you would not be wanting to hold gold in that moment.
Yeah, and people like him just don't hear that. I'd be so curious, like, what your thoughts are too on the older generations adopting Bitcoin. To me, like, I have a lot of respect for all people that adopt Bitcoin, but I just think it is so admirable when people that were once gold bugs or of Peter Schiff's age group adopt Bitcoin and change their mind on it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
First of all, I think that gold bugs and Bitcoiners and gold bugs should not be this sort of adversarial at each other's throats kind of thing, because really we agree on 99% of stuff and what the problems are. We just disagree on like the one final solution. Peter Schiff, I think, is an outlier because he's makes money selling gold. So he's out there, he's doing marketing. Okay. In case you weren't aware, anybody out there listening, he's doing marketing. He doesn't give two shits about what you say to him about Bitcoin. He wants the engagement. So just know that he's not actually trying to, he probably doesn't believe half the stuff he says. He's doing marketing. But I agree that like, whether it's Larry Lepard or like other guys who are like used to be, gold bugs or, traditional market guys, I think they do deserve almost more commendation than, a younger person who didn't grow up with that, because they had to unwind more traditional TradFi or more like cemented beliefs for 60 years of stuff, and they had to get this new technology which like try to get most boomers to like understand how an iPhone or whatever, like it's hard to shift your mind, A, when you're older, but B, when you have so much previous history of like this thing not existing. It's very hard for most people to be like, wait, a thing that doesn't exist and is ones and zeros on a screen has more value than my house. Like, they deserve a lot of commendation for being able to shift their mindset and be that flexible to like be open to a new thing and then go down the rabbit hole to try to understand it.
I definitely hope that I can do that as I get to be older age too. I feel like as millennials, like we've had a lot of these technological changes, so I think that we're a little quicker to pick up on new ones at least, but we'll see if that changes. And I think that's sort of a normal growing up thing, that you do become a little more resistant to change. But the Bitcoin community in general seems to push back on that and have more optimism about new technology. So I think that's been good to be around, because I've even watched friends that are younger or the same age as me be really, really nihilistic towards new things out there.
I would argue that unfortunately, I think a lot of that is just due to the affinity scams. There's just the shitcoinery around it. Is most people don't even know that Bitcoin and crypto are different things. Like, they just think it's all the same thing, right? Like one big umbrella, Bitcoin and crypto under both of them, both scams, FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, you name it, it's all a scam. And so we have to first do the unwinding of, no. These things are different. Like it goes fiat umbrella, which has crypto under it, Bitcoin outside of it, right? Like that's the meme.
Yeah, the amount of times I've had like a really good conversation with somebody, thought I presented Bitcoin in a pretty elegant way, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm not really into that crypto stuff, or like immediately say like crypto, like it just is like an arrow going into your heart.
Or they just, like a week later you get a text like, well, should I buy XRP?
Yeah.
And you're like,
no.
Did you not hear what I said?
It feels like watching the same movie over and over again. And I'll have more hope sometimes, and then I'll get like another arrow through the heart when it fails again. A thing I've been trying to think about lately is that sometimes people just need a lot of touch points. Like I said that I had exposure to Bitcoin in 2015, 17, 19, 20. Like it was a lot of times. I'm a stubborn person sometimes. Like it took a lot. Like even if you don't succeed on persuading somebody that Bitcoin is a useful tool on your first time, I do still think it's worth trying, and that you might be that first touch point for somebody, even if they never tell you it in the future. They never say like, hey, thank you. It's still just the fact that you got some positive exposure towards them, were kind towards them when you did it, I think could make it so the sixth or seventh time or third time maybe they hear about it, they are more open to the idea.
Well, that's why they got to make Blood of the Bourgeoisie into a narrative fiction podcast, and then they got to make it into a movie or a Netflix series.
Working on it.
Yeah, no, that'd be sick. Well, I mean, I know, I think I've heard you say before that like you specifically did not want to like do a Satoshi story because like maybe that's not the most interesting part to you, or maybe it feels overdone. But I do think it's almost like the story of Satoshi, like how is this not going to be like the eighth wonder of the world at some point when Bitcoin is worth $10 million and people keep looking back and going, some guy, wait, what, in his basement, like created perfect money and just released it to the world anonymously and no one knows who he is. And then he disappeared and he controls the keys to maybe 600,000 to a million Bitcoin and he's never moved it. Like, it's utterly fascinating, like when you really go think about it. And people have done stories of trying to figure out who he is. I think that's not the most interesting aspect of it. But at some point there'll be like maybe you'll write a fiction book. I'm not trying to, but maybe you'll write one about Satoshi and like just how utterly fascinating the story is.
It truly is. Like the story in its own right is so amazing. Where it's kind of been I don't know if this is reflective of a lot of people. This might just be me personally, but I don't really like when people have Satoshi in their story be like one of their main characters and makes all sorts of stuff up about them. Because I just like to keep Satoshi as this like idealistic person that had the foresight to just invent something great for the world and then leave. One of the books that I mentioned earlier that I didn't think was particularly good did this heavily, where like had some character from a previous book that, oh yeah, suddenly they were Satoshi doing this thing, and like I don't want to speak too poorly of it because I do think like the exposure to Bitcoin is just a net positive always too, but I just don't like that. I really think the path dependence of Bitcoin is so important. Like how this thing came to be is all part of its story. So to fundamentally change parts of the story feels to me like saying things about Bitcoin are different than they are, like saying it's 22 million instead. Like if you make up a bunch of fiction that happened about Satoshi in 2013, that fundamentally changes the path dependence that Bitcoin exemplifies.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's like a very difficult needle to thread between like just the low-hanging fruit of like, I'll just make my character Satoshi and then like personify him in all these ways that, we don't know are true, versus somehow a story around this sort of, immaculate conception of this mythical origin thing of like just some entity we don't know who created perfect money. There's like a needle to thread somewhere in there that's between the extremes. I don't know.
There definitely is, because it's like one of the coolest stories ever. It's not even fictional. It's just an amazing thing that really happened.
Yeah. Well, this is a little bit of a tangent, but like, when people like Tucker Carlson desecrate our Lord and Savior Satoshi Nakamoto by just saying, "Oh, it was the CIA." Obvious. This is definitely the CIA. It's like, I don't know. There's just so many. I just made a video like ranting about it, but it's like you could go for 20 minutes on like, first of all, maybe. Who cares? Doesn't matter. Like, well, thanks CIA for giving us perfect censorship-resistant money that you can't control. That was dumb of you to do that. But also, just ignoring all the actual evidence and things you can read about the actual origin of the story. Like, this person who built on 40 years of other developments in cryptography and worked on it for 18 months and then released it, without a pre-mine and all these things. And this person who understood, the history of money, economics, finance, also cryptography, also, programming, had all this expertise to create this thing and have the foresight to understand all the reasons why it may not work or may work, but also not knowing that it would work and having it have no monetary value for like at least a year.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. There's something there though that's really interesting, and like I don't think it even has to do with the CIA. I think that a lot of times people, even like very smart people, will have way more of their thoughts changed by emotion than they are willing to admit. Where it's more like, I don't want to admit that I was wrong about Bitcoin, and there's some emotion going on there, then they just latch on to whatever story they can to make it sound like it's a well-articulated thought, rather than like reevaluating their belief systems. I think there's an audience capture issue there with Tucker too. Like he had Roger Ver on a year ago or something like that, and you could just see Roger Ver pulling at the strings of conspiratorial stuff that Tucker loves. And then like I could just tell like he got one-shotted basically by this. Like, yeah, you're gonna hate Bitcoin because you were desperately looking for some conspiracy theory to make it feel like you didn't ignore the thing when you should have, because he definitely had exposure to it much earlier and ignored it. And rather than admitting that to himself, he's going to look for stories to tell himself. And I think a lot of people do that. Like that's kind of one of the ways that people don't get stuff. But like rather than engaging with people and say like, oh, this is logically why the CIA didn't invent Bitcoin, like there's a deeper emotional thing going on there, likely. And I think that's probably what most people that ignore Bitcoin and probably need.
Yeah, I think that people definitely are looking for heuristics to help them justify why they ignored Bitcoin or why Bitcoin is stupid. And so, like, well, we don't know who created it, therefore you can't trust it. Therefore, it was the CIA. Oh, okay, I got my reason why I can keep dismissing that thing. Yes, I agree. I think that, and this is why we need the right person to go on Rogan, so
Yeah.
that he doesn't get Roger Ver as his one
Yeah.
Bitcoiner to explain it to him.
Yeah,
Bitcoin.
almost the exact same problem there, right? Where there's like, if you get a Roger Ver on there, it's going to go bad.
Very bad. Yeah. Well, I know we have a few minutes left. I kind of wanted to pivot to a couple things that are like in the recent news, because I know you tweet a lot about MSTR, like interested in that. I was curious what your thoughts are on this, because we're recording this right when MSTR just came out that they got credit rated for the first time and they got a B minus. So the takes are ranging from, Standard and Poor's is idiots for giving them a B minus. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the actual rating itself is way less important than the fact they got a rating at all. That speaks volumes. Like, it's another one of those things where I don't think the market has caught up to how profound this is for that industry. The entire direction there, all the treasury companies are heading, or at least like most of the successful ones, is these preferred share kind of things, an arbitrage between like giving high levels of interest and buying Bitcoin and like taking advantage of the spread. And all of those are kind of dependent upon a credit rating. So just the fact they got one means the entirety of this industry can now start to get credit ratings of their own, at least pursue that. I don't know that this is happening overnight. I don't know like how, I honestly don't even really understand the mechanics behind the scenes of how these things get credit ratings. It's kind of new to me. But yeah, the any kind of institutional like stamp of approval on this at all, even if it's the lowest tier, is fantastic. And they only have room to grow and improve from here. I think it'll keep trending that way over time. Just a huge, huge win for that entire industry.
I don't know if you have thoughts on this or not too, but this just happened too that I saw. The Metaplanet is buying back some of their share. Well, Metaplanet is buying back some of their shares, and I also saw that I think it's Sequans, if to my knowledge, is one of the first Bitcoin treasury companies that reportedly, I don't know if this is factually true, is selling the Bitcoin. Do you have thoughts on either of those two things, or selling some of it? Do you have thoughts
Uh,
on either of those two things?
I thought this was an inevitability that this would eventually happen. It does make sense from a financial engineering perspective. Uh, I have not studied the Sequans thing as much. The Metaplanet one in particular, though, I thought that was just like you want optionality, right? Like one of the reasons we like Bitcoin is it's like one of the most optionality increasing kinds of money, or it is literally the most optionality increasing kind of money. But this allows them optionality to take out debt. The way I believe it's structured right now is they haven't actually done it yet. But if they do drop well below their MNAV, they're able to take out debt to do this. And to me, it also showed, like, I think it was like 2 to 3 months ago, they were hitting their ATM or the version of their ATM to get rid of their debts. And people were kind of like, oh, we don't really want you to do that. We want you to remain in more debt because the goal is to stay like highly volatile. And I honestly like wanted them to stay more indebted too, so they can have more Bitcoin relative to where they were at. But in hindsight, that was kind of brilliant because now they have this avenue to get more debt, and they can use it to buy their shares and boost their MNAV. I don't know. I'm pretty pro them taking out debt in general because they can do it in a way that's infinitely more efficient than I can. And they seem to be pretty good at timing these things too, relatively, which is interesting because I'm not. I'm terrible at predicting where things are going to go. I thought Bitcoin was going to do all sorts of stuff that it didn't do, and I've been wildly wrong many, many times over, and probably will be again soon. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm really, really impressed with Metaplanet. I'm insanely bullish on them overall. I Something though I always like want to make sure I clarify whenever I'm talking about this is like Bitcoin is the real show. Like this is a sideshow. I It's just so intellectually stimulating and interesting. Like, I went to school for business originally, and it was a terrible education where I learned almost nothing about how real businesses work. And then I spend a little bit of time on Twitter, and I'm like learning about this wild new paradigm of credit, and it just like it unleashed element of like financial creativity that I just had not been exposed to. So it's really cool. But yeah, Bitcoin's the real revolution. This is just a fun other thing.
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree, to most degree across the board. Like, I also got a business economics degree, so I'm interested in it in general. I was interested in MSTR, like you said, because of just the sort of bleeding edge financial engineering kind of thing that they were doing. I wasn't like as much of an MSTR bull as like a bunch of other people out there, but I'm always like interested in the story, then interested in the Meta Planet story, and then as the story became like more and more Bitcoin treasury companies, sort of became like more and more diluted in my eyes, and I don't have like a definitive opinion across all this, but I've been wrestling with the idea that like, okay, this is interesting. It's a natural evolution that companies want to buy Bitcoin. I'm not like against that. Are they good things for retail to buy? Is where I sort of end up is like, and then to me, I haven't definitively parsed out all the details on this, but my perception is that things like MSTR, Metaplanet, Smarter Web, I think, have done things in a way that I think are a little bit different than some of the other ones who have not seen as much success have gone about it differently. Mostly, I think it's sort of the pipe funding round thing. The ones that have done that, to me, seem different. Where I'm like, this seems like as a retail trader, I'm not wanting to go near that quite as much. I don't know if you have thoughts on that. That's a deep topic. We don't have time to go way into it, but
People have been absolutely crushed by these things, and it's terrible
yeah,
and heartbreaking. And yeah, I find the preferred share strategy to be by far the most interesting because
yeah,
it's a need for people that to have high interest income and basically taking advantage of the spread, putting it into Bitcoin. That's so clearly going to be successful to me over time that I'm very confident that those will pan out. With that said, I'm not like recommending them to anybody ever. All my friends who ask me, like I have a group chat where we're talking about investments and stuff, and I'm always just the Bitcoin guy in there. And they're like, "Oh, what
yeah,
other stocks do you like?" I'm like, "I think these things are cool, but you should just buy Bitcoin." Like I'd recommend that first for sure. But one of the things that kind of was a red flag to me is when it was more about like the community of investors that were there rather than the, like what are they mechanically doing, what tools that differentiate them. And the problem is all of them have this problem too, where even MSTR had this wild community of fervorous investors, of which I was one of. But like it's not just about building a community and then like taking advantage of the spread to hit the ATM. It's about actually functionally creating a product. MSTR has clearly done that. Metaplanet's clearly doing that. I think a few of the other ones are also going to be doing that. I don't know which ones it's going to be. It's going to probably be hard to pick. I think there's a couple that I do am partial to and own shares of, but yeah, it's going to be weird. And I think a lot of them are going to fail or get purchased by larger ones or that kind of thing. It's sort of
yeah.
an interesting experience watching a new industry evolve in real time at such breakneck speeds too.
Yeah, and I basically agree in that I think it was like in June, I like put out a tweet. I was like, I want to be on record. Bitcoin is better than paper Bitcoin, securitized Bitcoin, wrapped Bitcoin, all these other, financialized Bitcoin things. Like, do whatever you're going to do. Just, do your own research and just know that Bitcoin is the real deal. Some of these other things are interesting to follow or study, and some of them may succeed or some may not. But to me, it comes down to like, I didn't get into Bitcoin to be like, it's like stock picking or it's like picking cryptos. Like, which one is going to be the one when all the others go to zero? And I kind of like, for me, it's like retail. Anybody who I think is retail needs to remember like Bitcoin is the thing that is definitely going to win. And if you want to gamble or, speculate on something else, like that's totally fine. Just remember that that's a little more like throwing darts at a wall, in my opinion, but who knows?
Yeah, mine too. It's wild to me that people are like all in MSTR or something and then don't hold Bitcoin or don't like even understand it deeply. It's just crazy. I think a lot of those people are going to be shaken out over time in one way or another.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you giving me the time. If anyone hasn't gotten it, Blood of the Bourgeoisie, got to get it. I will report back when I finish it. I'm enjoying it so far. It's great. And then it'll be sick when they put out a movie about it in a couple years. We'll be stoked to watch that too.
Working on it. Thank you so much for the attention, and I appreciate it, everybody.